Yeah, everyone is able to hear me. I'm not talking still. I'm just waiting for others to join. I just shared the screen. Just wait for some time. All right then. Yeah, just will wait for others to join. I'm just waiting for others to join. Otherwise, I can continue. So yesterday's one, right? Everyone understood this connection pool? Any doubts in this yesterday's connection pool topic? Whatever I told you. Any doubt? Any doubts here? Any doubts? If anyone is having any doubts in this yesterday's connection pool that I told? What is connection pooling? Anyone can reply? Whatever I told about yesterday's connection pooling, anyone can just paste that message in the chat. Okay, in connection pool, it is used for at a time how many connections use. Okay, see, you can tell like a connection pool is like a buffer. It is in a buffer area to store connections. See, you can think like it is like a kind of a reservoir where it can hold multiple connection objects. Okay, and whenever any request comes to your application, okay, it will get that connection from the pool instead of creating a new connection object. Okay, pool you can think like it is a reservoir, right? Pool you can think like it is a kind of a buffer area. So in that we specify minimum pool size, maximum pool size. That means how many minimum connections are to be created, your maximum connections to be created. So we specify that, right? That is what connection pool tells. Anyone is having any doubt in this yesterday's what I told you, so that I'll go to the next one. Okay, what about others? What about others? Right. No, I'm just asking, anyone is having any doubt? Right. Now, let me now explain you about. Okay. So for Hibernate, what is required? Yesterday we told, right? Hibernate requires database connection. Like to create a database connection needs host name, password, and all that. Right? So we define the database connection here in the form of data source. Next, what is next required? Session factory. What is session factory? I told in Hibernate. What is session factory? When I was explaining a session. Anyone can recall what is session factory? Session factory is the factory class that creates Hibernate session objects. And what is an Hibernate session object? It is used for managing all the database operations, right? I mean, it is used for managing all the database operations between your Java objects and the database tables. That's what session, right? Now when we're integrating with Spring now we are integrating this Hibernate code with Spring, right? So first what we define data source bean. Next, what we are defining now we are defining every object that we create in Spring will be treated as a bean, separate bean ID, separate bean. Okay. So now for session factory, we use bean ID equal to session factory. Okay. So this is a separate bean actually. This is a separate bean. And for that, what is the class we are using? org.springframework.orm.hibernate5.local session factory bean. What this class does? So basically, what this class okay. So this local session factory bean, so what it does is it creates a session factory and sets in Spring application context. Okay. See, for example, if you go to your normal Hibernate program that we have seen earlier, what we have done now, if you see here, we created a session factory, okay, from the configuration, and from the session factory, we got the session, right? This is how we created in the normal Hibernate. But now, when you come to Spring what Spring will have? Spring will have the application context, right? Application context or Spring container, right? This is the core part of the Spring, which does the IOC and dependency injection. Now, any object that is managed by the Spring container application context is considered as Spring bean, right? Any object that is managed by application context or Spring container is considered as Spring bean. right? Is considered as Spring Bean, right? Now, when we're integrating the Hibernate code with this Spring, right? When we're integrating Hibernate with Spring, first is, so Hibernate integration with Spring. Okay. So Hibernate integration with Spring. So we need to create the objects that are used in Hibernate as Spring Beans, right? So we need to define the objects that are used in Hibernate as Spring Beans, right? So basically, what are the objects that we are using in Hibernate? We need to define the objects that are used in Hibernate. See, what are the objects that are used in Hibernate, right? Your session object. These are your Hibernate related, your Hibernate core objects, these are all session object, right? Next is data source or connection object. So we call here data source, which is connection pool, right? Next, transactions. All these are objects we are using in Hibernate, right? These are all the objects. I mean, session, we are beginning the transaction, we are committing the transaction, right? So now we need to now define this as beans in your Spring configuration. So the first configuration what we defined is in Spring configuration, what we defined the first bean is the first bean is data source bean, right? Data source bean, right? This is the first bean. And who creates these beans? Your application context creates these beans. This is what IOC, right? Your data source. What now we'll be doing second one? So we will create session factory bean. Okay. To create to create data source bean, we use third-party libraries, third-party connection pool libraries, right? We use third-party connection pool libraries to create data source bean, which is this one, like examples, this one, your example, this one, your combo pool data source. This is your third party com dot, like that. You have, as I was telling yesterday, we have Hikari also, one connection pool library. These are your third party libraries. Okay. So examples, combo pooled data source, right? Like that. Next, session factory bean. What we do, we use local session factory bean, which is part of your org.springframework.orm. This is Spring ORM module. Okay, local session factory bean. So what local session factory bean will do? It will create Hibernate session factory, and store in Spring application context. Okay, it will create Hibernate session factory and store in application. So as when once the object is stored or mapped with the Spring application context, that means this becomes your session factory becomes a Spring bean now. So it is, though it is a part of your Hibernate class, but since it is managed by your application context, so it becomes no Spring bean. What is the advantage of this? What is the advantage of this? Can anyone tell? What is the advantage of a bean managed by an or an object managed by a Spring application context? IOC, DI, dependency injection, right? We can inject this object, we can inject this section factory bean in any class with auto while, right? That is what dependency injection. So the advantage is The advantage of Spring managed object or Spring Bean is it can be injected wherever required using auto wired, right? Also the bean life cycle. Okay. So the bean life cycle. So this will be injected. You don't need to create a separate code to inject it. Also the bean life cycle is completely managed by Spring application context, right? So now this bean life cycle also we have seen, okay, when we studied about Spring Core and all that. Now, this is what actually, so session factory bean. So we define that. So it will create Hibernate session factory and store it in Spring application context. So that is what we are doing here. Okay, and for this local session factory bean, what are the different properties we have to tell is, we have to tell data source, right? See, what is required for a session factory? The connection details, right? The DB connection details. Then only your session factory can create a session, and from session using the connection object internally, it will do the database operations, right? Like session.save or session.update, whatever the methods. So it needs connection. So thereby the session factory takes my data source as a bean. Where is your my data source defined? Here. So that means this bean, this is a data source, this connection, this is what you call connection pool bean, which contains multiple DB connections. So this multiple DB connections bean is passed to this session factory bean so that it will use that data source and it will use that connection to create sessions, right? Then the next one we have to tell is packages to scan. If you remember, if you go to your Hibernate configuration example, let me go to here. See, in Hibernate configuration class also, if you see under session factory, we give this connection driver class, connection URL, connection username, password. Now all these now will be part of your data source bean, right? Your data source bean. So now in Spring, when we are integrated with Spring, we specify like this: property name equal to data source, this one, and property name equal to packages to scan. Now we have to tell that where are these entity classes present. If you go with the normal Hibernate code, so here we used to tell like this, right? We used to tell this is an entity class. Where your entity class will be managed by your Hibernate, right? Now when we define that in Spring, when we define that in your Spring, we tell like packages to scan. I mean, where are your entity classes present in which package? See, suppose if I go to this package, com.student_tab.entity, let me go here. Okay, com.student_tab.entity. This is the package. So this is the Java package. In this package, you have the entity classes. So in this package, you can have multiple entity classes. Okay, because suppose if I have 2 or 3 tables in my database, I'll define 2 or 3 entities here, right? Each entity is mapped to one table, right? So that's what here I'm defining. So this entity is mapped to this table. Now, where are these entity classes present? In this package. So we give this package name so that it will search for all the classes present in this package, which are marked with entity. Okay. So that's what we define. But why actually this is required? Because your ORM, your object relational mapping, what it does, it maps the Java class to the table. It maps a record in a table to an object in Java. All the ORM I told you, right? So that is why for a session factory to create, it should know what are the different entities it has to map or manage with the table. That is the reason we have to specify. Even in your Hibernate code also, if you see here, in normal Hibernate code, also we have told which are your entity classes. Now, when we integrate with Spring, we define that in our configuration like this. Okay, like this, packages to scan. So what will happen? It will go to the particular package and scan for the entities and create the beans and inject into the session factory. Now, the next one, what we are defining, Hibernate properties. See, I told you, right? We'll define MySQL dialect in your normal Hibernate configuration. Also, if you see, here we told dialect, which is your MySQL dialect. What this dialect will do? It will now map between your Java data types to your MySQL data types. See, for example, in my Java data type, my data type is string. This is your Java type. Now it has to map to your column phone number in your table. This can be your varchar. Okay. In your MySQL, you define this as a varchar. Okay. Integers in your MySQL, you define it as a number, right? So MySQL dialect will map these data types from Java to the corresponding table data types. So this will map to a varchar. This will map to a number like that. Okay. Suppose if you give Oracle dialect, it will map with the Oracle data types, because in your different databases, all the data types will not be same. For example, in MySQL, we say int for integer. Okay. In Oracle, we say int and number. So like the different data types will be there, right? Suppose here we said double in Java. In MySQL, we can say, so in MySQL, we say there is a double or there is also decimal, right? So like the different data types. So this dialect, will map your Java data type with your MySQL data type, right? Now the same thing when I give in Spring, when I define integrate Spring, here I'll say Hibernate.dialect and I'll give MySQL dialect. And suppose if you're using Oracle database, it will give Oracle dialect, right? That is one. You have to give Oracle dialect. Next. So next, what is the next one? Another one is Hibernate.show_SQL. So what this one? See, suppose I told you, right, every Hibernate operation. Say, for example, I say session.save. Right, session.save. So what this does? So this is your Hibernate method. Internally, this will generate. This will generate SQL insert query. Okay. Similarly, when I say session.get or load. So internally, so this will generate SQL selects. This is insert statement, we guess, not query. This is insert SQL select query. Okay, this is a read operation. Now we wanted to see what is the SQL corresponding to each Hibernate method. We wanted to see. Okay, for that we put show SQL. Show SQL, when I say true, okay, in the configuration. Right? So we can see the SQL queries generated from Hibernate methods. Okay, when the program is running. Right? So that's what here I specify. Show SQL equal to true. Okay. Next. So what is the next one if you see? Next, transactions, right? These are very, very important. Your Hibernate doesn't work if there are no transactions. Here also, if you see, after first I create a session factory, then from session factory I get session, then we start session.transaction.begin. And after completing all, we say session.transaction.commit, and in between we have DB operations. So similarly here also, we'll have a transaction manager to be created, and this manages all the transactions. Okay. So see, I told you that everything when we integrate with Spring, it has to be defined as beans actually. Okay. Spring will consider them as a beans. So now I say bean ID equal to my transaction manager and class. Okay. This is your bean, which is your org.springframework.orm.hibernate5.hibernate transaction manager. Now this transaction manager will take the session factory as an object, right? So this transaction manager will take session factory as an object. If you see, first what we define, first we define data source. This is your data source bean, which contains database connection details, right? And it is a storage of multiple connections, database connections, right? Now, from data source bean, what we created from this bean, we created session factory. Right? Now, from session factory, what we created? We created transaction manager. Right? So, your session factory bean is created from data source bean. Is it dependent on data source bean? Right? Your transaction manager, bean is it dependent on session factory bean. Right? So this is what. So this is what we defined. 3 beans we defined. One is data source bean, another one is session factory bean, another one is transaction manager. And what transaction manager will do? It will actually help in managing the transactions. And here if you see TX annotation driven transaction manager equal to, we define this bean reference. This whatever this my transaction manager is this one. And you know what this does is it enables the configuration of transactional behavior based on annotations. See, for example, if you see here in our project, see I say @transaction. @transaction. So what this does @transaction, I'll tell you. See, in your Hibernate code, you are telling like this. If you go to normal Hibernate code, your normal without using Spring, in normal Hibernate code, what you do? I say session dot begin transaction, right? But this is what we do, right? So if you see here, yeah, this is what set session dot get transaction dot begin. Right. Right. And then here we have all the DB related DB operations and all, right? And I'll say next one is session dot transaction dot commit. This will close the transaction or commits the transaction. If there is any exception comes, it will roll back. This is what in normal Hibernate code. Now, when we integrate this Hibernate now with Spring now, when we integrate this with So with the Spring, okay, Hibernate integrated with Spring. So what will happen now? Now, if you see your main code calls service class. Service class calls DAO class, right? Okay. Suppose your main means controller, @controller calls @service. This we know, right? @service, right? @service calls @repository. Now, in @repository, you have all this Hibernate, the class containing @repository has all the Hibernate, right? Now, service is calling the repository. The class containing the repository has all the Hibernate. Now, here what we do is when we integrate Spring, we don't handle these transactions here in the repository code. Instead of that, we handle at the service class. Suppose it is like this. Suppose in my controller, I say post mapping, right? In Spring MVC, sorry, we don't have post mapping, right? Sorry. I say request mapping. I did not tell you about post mapping yet. I'll tell you. Request mapping, right? Suppose we take this code only. We have seen last time, right? Post mapping, that REST APIs, I did not tell you, right? So we have this one, right? Process form data, right? Right. What this does, it takes the form data and inserts into the database, right? Right. So we'll remove this part. Right. Now, what we'll do here, we call the service class. Here, what we do, I'll say @auto_wide. Here, I'll say some student data service. Right. And here I'll say student data service dot save student data. Save student, right? Save student data. I'll say like this. Right? Right. Now this will call the service class. This is your service class. Class student service. Here I'll say @service. And here I'll say public. Okay, something like void. Okay, save student data. Right. So here what I'll do, here I'll put @transaction. Right. And then here I'll say, see, I'll tell you, here I'll say @auto_wide. I'll say @auto_wide student repository or student DAO also. Student DAO right? Now here I'll say student DAO. Student DAO dot save student. I think here I have to write this object also. Student, right? Student, I have to write this one. Okay, student data dot save of student, right? So here also I have to write student. Right? Now what will happen now? This will go to your Hibernate code, which is your @ repository. And here I'll say class student DAO, right? Here I'll say public void save of student. And since I'm managing with Spring, right, I can easily auto-wire the session factory. Auto-wire session factory. Because the session factory now is already created by, your Spring application context creates this and you can inject this. That's what, right? See, this session factory is defined as a bean. You can actually, this will be created by your Spring application context. So you can inject it. And here I can say session factory dot session equal to session factory dot, okay, get the current session. We'll say session dot save of student, right? So this is how I'm just giving a rough code actually. Now, only thing is what you have to see here, we are not in your normal Hibernate code. Here we say get transaction, this one, right? Okay. So in normal code, normal Hibernate code, if you see here, so we just say session dot get transaction dot begin. We do, but when you integrate with Spring, you are not handling the transactions here. At the service layer itself, this transaction, what it will do? So this will create the transaction. This will create the transaction before start of. This will create this transaction and close the transaction. This will create the transaction and close the transaction. This will create the transaction before the start of the method. And close the transaction after the start of the method. After the end of the method. And close the transaction before the end of the method. That means whatever you're doing session.get in the code, that can be managed by this transaction annotation. And how this works is internally this works with a proxy. That means this method, okay, is called like first start a transaction, then call this method, then end the transaction in that way, just like here. See, if you see session.get transaction.begin, then do the DB operations, then commit the transaction. Here also, so this annotation, what it will do? First start the transaction, then do this operation, then end the transaction. So this annotation will do like this. So first start the transaction. Start transaction. Next what it is, student DAO save. Next, commit or end transaction. So these are the three. Okay, like that, suppose if in the same method, suppose in the same method, you have one more operation, like another operation, like student.dev.us.save. Now you'll have one more operation like college DAO, something like this. Okay, dot save of student like this. I'm just telling. That means now first start a transaction, then these two methods. So this annotation will work like that. So what this annotation will do? So first start the transaction, next call these two, and then end the transaction. So instead of handling that in the repository class, we manage that at the service level. So that's what this transaction does. See, I have in 2016, in year 2016, I have put one YouTube video, okay, on this other transaction, how it will work with the Spring proxy. And that video has become very popular during the time because that was the first concept. It was told like how this transaction internally works, how this is creating the transactions. Okay, it is actually like first start a transaction, then call these two methods or three methods. How many methods are there in this in this method? So this method is calling multiple methods. First start a transaction, then call all these methods, then commit or end transaction. And how this works, okay, I'll give you, okay, I'll share you that link. Okay, you can go through that 1 minute. Okay. So I'm just putting here. You can watch this, okay? Okay, this is created by me only. You can watch this video. How this alternate transaction works with a proxy concept. But you can think like this. Whenever I put a transaction on this method, so first it will start a transaction. Like in Hibernate, how we are doing? First start a transaction, then do all your DB operations and then commit. So similarly here also, first start a transaction, then call all these methods, whatever you present inside this method, and then commit or end transaction. Now, why I told all this? Because in my XML, in the configuration, I told once I create the transaction manager bean, so then we enable configuration of transactional behavior. Okay. So based on annotations. Okay. So, and to enable that alternate transactional, we are giving like this. Okay. One question that is, can we put transaction to DAO class? Right. Suppose if you think like this. Suppose if you think like this. From my service class method, we need to call, suppose let us think like this. I'll give an example. I have my controller class, right? In my controller class, there is a request came to save orders. You know this e-commerce application, right? You know this e-commerce application, like your Flipkart application or your Amazon application, where you log into the application and generate orders to purchase the data, right? To purchase some products. So that is a URL pattern. This order scheme. Now what this will do? Now this will call a service class. This will call a service class. Now in service class now, what it will do now, we have a method right? And this method, what it will do is, first it will, this will call DAO method dot save orders. I'm just writing not syntax, I'm writing a pseudo logic. DAO dot save invoice, like this. I write like this. Now this will call, right? This will call a DAO class. In DAO class, we have save orders. Okay. Next is save invoice. Two methods. This is one method. This is another method. Now your DAO.save orders will call this method. And then DAO.save invoice will call this method. Now suppose if I don't handle transaction here, that means I have to handle the transactions at each of these two methods. This is one transaction, this is another transaction. And this is wrong, right? Suppose if there is no transaction handled at this method level, in service I'm not handling, I'm handling that here. That means this should be in one when I use here upgrade transactional, right? Similarly, this also when I use upgrade transactional, right? So these two transactional, what it will do? Now this is running in its own transaction, this is running its own transaction, but it is not like that, right? These two should run in one transaction. Because why? If orders data fails, invoice also should fail. If invoice fails, orders data also fail. Okay, that means if orders data is failed, that means invoice should not be generated. If invoice is some issue there is generating, your orders data also should not be saved. So these two should be running in one transaction. Suppose if I put like this is running in its own transaction, this is running in its own. Transaction means what? All the DB operations should be success. Okay. Under a transaction, if I say start transaction, if I say start transaction, end transaction, so I'll say DB1, okay, DB operation 1. Next, DB operation 2. Right? So all these operations, see, all these are running in one transaction, so that if one operation fails, other operations should also fail, otherwise success. Now, suppose if I put transaction on this method and on this method, if I put, now they're running in two transactions, so if it will not be possible, right? So this we cannot put transaction here. The only way we have to put is at here. Here we have to put at the rate transaction. Here we have to put at the rate transaction. So when we put here at the rate transaction, what will happen now? Now, so before these two methods called, at the start of this method, it will start a transaction. So this will start a transaction. This annotation, it will start transaction, right? This will start a transaction. Next, it will call now DAO.save orders. Next, DAO.save invoice. Then end transaction. Right? Now, if you see here, now these two operations are running in one transaction. Suppose if orders fails, invoice also should get failed. It will roll back. It will roll back. If invoice fails, orders also should roll back. Now these two are, that's why we are putting the transaction at the service level rather than at the DAO level. If you put at the service level, these two operations are running in one transaction. So wherever the method I have. Everyone clear? Now, so this annotation driven, that means whatever at the rate transaction to enable that, we use this annotation. We define this. So TX annotation driven transaction manager equal to my transaction manager. Okay, this is fine. What is the next one? Add support for reading web resources like CSS, images, JS, etc. You know what this annotation will do, you know? Now you see. Right. So what this annotation will do is, so this is actually, it will support for reading web resources. Suppose in my, where this actually my CSS, all this will be present in a web application, it will be present here. Under web app, if you see, under web app, you see the structure under web app. Let me do like this. Okay. You know what are cascading style sheets? Anyone knows idea on that? They are used in HTML, right? For styling purpose. Suppose if you see here, now you see. Now, just see this. Now you see, in your web application structure, you will store under resources, you will store, these are your CSS or any images in your web application you want to use, or any JavaScript files, all you will be storing here in this folder. Okay. Now, so that's why we give location as resources, whatever this folder. Okay, you can give any name here. I'm just giving, this is the standard name we use. So this is this location, right? So this is your location. Now under this, okay, now these are your CSS, JS or anything. Now I want to access this file. These are your static files. Similarly, you have images also. I want to access an image file. I want to access an image file as a URL. You know what I mean? Say for example, this style.css is there. This is present in the code base. But if I want to access from a browser, I want to view this from a URL. So that is what this resource this will do. What this will do is, this will map the static files present in this folder to map to this URL pattern. This is your URL pattern. Okay, this is your URL pattern. Right? So this is your URL pattern. Now, URL pattern. Now, in my browser, if I say, now I start this application. Okay. Now, what is my application URL name? Localhost. Localhost 8080/spring MVC demo1 / resources style.css. See, similarly for images also you can use like that. Suppose if I store any image here, under resources, I say some logo.jpg, my company website logo, your images. Suppose under resources, you'll have one more folder, which is your images. Under that images, you'll have. Okay, first let me see with this. Now, when I give this URL, what you know, this MVC resource, what you know, this URL pattern, whatever this URL pattern, this is matching with this, right? This is matching with this slash resources slash star star. So starting with this is, you forget about this. This is your web application. Okay. From here, you have to see the URL pattern. So slash resources slash anything after that. So slash resource type. Now this URL pattern is matching with this. Now that means this CSS file should be present somewhere in this folder, present in this code base. Okay, that is what. So this mapping means the URL pattern should match with particular folder location in your code base. So that that particular file will be picked up. So when I give slash resources slash style.css, what it will do, now this URL pattern is matching with this. Now this mapping is for this location folder, which is present in your code base. Now in this folder, it will see for the style.css where it is present. So this CSS will be loaded here. That means I can access the static files like CSS, images, JSS, everything like an URL. Static files I can access like a URL. And why it is required? Because it will be easy for referring. For example, let me show you one thing. Let me go to your JSP page. Sorry, not in your. Let me go to your student form.jsp. If you see here I'm giving like this as a URL. As a URL, I'm giving. What is this one? This is your JSTL. Your JSTL. So this will dynamically evaluate instead of hard coding like this. Local host, this part, this complete part, we can replace with this dynamically. So that tomorrow, now I'm running in localhost. My application is running in localhost. I'm using like this. But what happens tomorrow if I deploy this application in some server? So definitely this localhost will not be applicable. It will change. Okay. So this will take a dynamic value. It is a dynamic value. So where it will refer for the context path. This is your context path. Your complete host name with this application. This is your context path. So tomorrow, if I hard code like this, every time for moving to different servers, I have to change this hard coded path. Otherwise, if I put like this, so in whichever environment or whichever server it is running, it will take that value dynamically. And then slash resources slash CSS I'm giving. Right? Slash resources. Just one minute, I'm getting one message. Just 1 minute. Huh? Yeah, I'll send this project in the group. Just 1 minute. Just 10. Just 1 minute. Sorry, I got a call. Yeah. So this will map to the particular location. Yeah. So that's what it is always used for, mapping your static image to your resources. Right? Yeah. Here I have to give resources slash CSS. So resources slash CSS slash style dots. Okay. CSS also subfolder is there. Resources slash CSS slash style dots. It will map to the this location. Right. What is next? That's all. I explained all the complete XML file. That's all. After this, there is nothing. Any doubts in this XML file? Any doubts in this XML file? Any questions here? Everyone clear? Whatever I explained this XML file. Everyone understood, right? Now, shall we see for one flow now? Now, what I'll do is now, let me start this. Let me know this one, right? I'm starting already. I started already. Okay. So, but I'm explaining in easy way. Okay, right? I'm explaining you all this. Everyone understood this XML file? That's why I'm going step by step. First time actually explaining step by step. Okay. Now fine then. Now let me now start the server. I started the server. I'll just say now localhost 8080 Spring MVC demo 1. And here I'll say in the controller class, I'll say slash student slash list. Student dot list. Why? No, student slash list. And Spring student tab actually. The application is not Spring MVC, it's student tab. Right? Now I got this list. How it is happening? Now I say slash student dot list. Where it will go now? It will go to this. So this is your base URL. So where it always starts with slash student, then it will go to list. Right? Now it will invoke this method. This will invoke this method. Right? This will invoke this method. Now here what it is calling? It is calling now the service class. What service class is doing now? It is calling this method. This is your service class. Right? Now it is calling your DAO class. Where it is DAO class is doing? Your DAO class is calling this method. Right? 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 It is calling this method. Now what this is doing? It is doing a Hibernate query where it is calling from student and it is getting the list of students. It is your Hibernate query. And here if you see session factory, just I'm doing auto wiring. That's all. Okay, just because already this bean is created. This bean is created as part of this definition. Right? We already created. We are just using this auto wiring. And we are the list of students now. Now this will query the student table. It will get the list of students, right? Now it will again return back to where? Your service class. Your service class returns back to your controller class. And from control, where it is going? From control. So now this will continue list of students getting from the database. Now I'm adding that in your model attribute so that this by this key, I can access that in the JSP page, right? That's what we have seen. Now this will go to your list-students.jsp. List-students.jsp. So go to your list-students.jsp. Here, these are all your HTML style sheets and all that. So here, if you see, if you remember, C for each, I told you, right? C for each student items, I iterated, and this is your student dot first name, last name, email. That is what this is coming. So first name, last name, email, action. Now, if you see here, if I go to this screen, here, if you see, if I click on this, it will go to one URL. If I click on this, it will go to one URL. So that's what here that is what I defined here. So what I'll do is anyhow, tomorrow I'll explain you again. I'll not make you more overloaded. I'll go step by step. So tomorrow I'll explain you this flow you understood, right? So from where it goes here. Finally, it will land in this list-students.jsp page, right? Everyone understood? Everyone clear with this today's concept, whatever I told you? Today, what I explained you? The XML configuration and this flow. Tomorrow, I'll explain you the JSP part. From where it has come? So first this